Both of the drivers, they look fantastic down behind the board. Absolutely middled that. I would certainly urge you to go through that process. I'm going to start this video with a very simple question. Have you ever used a Mizuno driver? If you have, leave some comments below, tell us about it. If you haven't, why haven't you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. The reason being that Mizuno have two new drivers out for 2021. They're called the Stz and the Stx. Now, I have already hit both of these two drivers on a launch monitor up against the previous generation ST200G, and I will show you that data later in the video. But before I get to that, I'm going to hit a few shots with both of these drivers and talk about what you can expect from the performance. And I'm going to start with the Stz driver, because this is the one that's designed to be a slightly lower spinning. It's neutral in terms of its kind of weight setup. You can see the weight that sits in the center at the back of the head. And of the two, this is slightly larger than the Stx. And I was a little bit surprised by that, because you would have thought the lower spinning version would be the more compact looking one. I would have thought this would be the more sort of forgiving, higher spinning version, but no. It has a great look. Both of the drivers, they look fantastic down behind the board. I think Mizuno have done a great job over the last few years in creating a look that is really modern in terms of it looks high tech, but it still has a really classic shape. There's not a huge amount of difference in terms of the way this looks down behind the ball versus the previous generation. I think you'll probably see that from the address view. But let's hit a couple of shots and see how we get on. Okay, so one of the big changes Mizuno say they've made within this generation of the driver is that they've improved the impact sound and the feel of the driver. So it has a carbon composite crown, but last year's ST200 drivers had quite a loud impact sound. I've got the old driver here, the ST200G. I'm going to hit one with this, and then I'll hit one with the Stz, and tell us if you think you can pick up any differences in terms of the sound, in terms of the feel. Absolutely middled that. For me, I think I was expecting more of a difference actually between the previous generation and this generation. Perhaps they have just dulled down that sound a little bit, made it sound and feel a fraction more powerful. But I think anyone who has played that previous generation Mizuno driver will probably be familiar with the sound that it makes. Let's hit a couple with the Stx. Now, the Stx, you have this weight that sits in the heel here that should offer a draw bias, and you've got a couple of different options there. If you want it more draw bias, you can have the kind of the J weighting, the J setup, which makes it more draw bias than this standard version that I've got here. And as I said at the start, it has a more rounded, slightly more compact footprint down behind the ball. And I really love the way this one looks. The shape of this is, just for me, absolutely spot on. I've had this in the standard weight setup, and I wouldn't say it's heavily draw biased. I would always be slightly wary of using a draw biased driver, but from the testing I've done so far, yes, I think it's there. I'm detecting it, but it's not, it's not changing the ball flight drastically for me. Let me hit one more. Right, so as I've already mentioned, I've had the chance to test these two drivers out up against last year's ST200G. Let's take a look at the launch monitor data. Okay, so before I show you the launch monitor data, just a quick word on how the three drivers were set up. So I had all three drivers in the same hazardous smoke RDX shaft. The Stz and the Stx were set to 10.5 degrees, whereas the ST200G, I had both of the movable weights in the sole moved right to the back of the head, and that was set to 10 degrees, so it's as close as I could get, the three drivers. And here is the launch monitor data, and I think the key finding for me here is how similar the performance was across the board. All three drivers, for me, perform really well. I think that if you are interested in potentially going with Mizuno this year for your driver, it's good to know that if you go for the Stz or the Stx, they both perform really well. And I think the differences will be down to your eye, will be down to what you see during your fitting. I would certainly urge you to go through that process, because for me, I was quite surprised that in the end, it was the Stx that seemed to win the day for me. This was the driver that I was most consistent with. So I wouldn't have necessarily thought that I'd end up with the draw bias version as being my choice, but it just seemed to deliver that consistency. I wasn't turning over shots too far to the left, but I equally wasn't losing any shots to the right. And I also prefer that looks down behind the ball of the Stx as well. So of the 3 drivers, last year's ST200G still performs really well, still really like that driver, but of the 3 that I tested, the one I would go for would be the Stx. So there you have it, those are the 2 ST drivers for 2021. Before you go, please do leave some comments below. What do you think of these 2? Would you be tempted to try them out for yourself? Really love to hear what you have to say. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.